Some quick housekeeping first. Go to the link in the description to get free access to the guided notes and the Anki flashcards that go along with this video. Now, let's get started. So, what is AWS? AWS provides us with scalable computing solutions. Let's break down this definition, beginning with the word solutions. Notice that solutions here is plural. Well, that's because AWS is made up of over 200 cloud-based services. Here you can see just a few of them. These services span across categories like compute power, storage, database storage, analytics, networking, developer tools, Internet of Things, and much, much more. Now that you understand on a very high level what AWS offers, let's go back to that definition. But this time, let's focus on the cloud computing portion. To understand what cloud computing is, though, we first need to understand how things used to be done in the old days. Now, not quite as old as the Flintstones, but before cloud computing was mainstream. This is Chelsea. She runs an old-timey business that makes IT applications. Now, remember that this is the old times, so to do this, Chelsea's business needs to host the entire infrastructure themselves. That means they need to host the data centers, the web servers, the file servers, database servers, networking hardware, the computers, among a bunch of other things. They have to take care of it themselves. The thing is, this is not cheap. First, she needs to secure funding for the initial infrastructure. This took her 5 months, but you know what? Thank God, it's done, right? Well, no, not quite. Now she needs to wait to set up the infrastructure. This took her another 2 months. But again, well, thank God it's done, right? Well, guess what? Chelsea's business is very successful. She needs more servers and more hardware, but this time she needs them in Asia because that's where demand for her business is growing exponentially. Now she has to do this whole thing over again. She has to secure funding and then wait to build the new infrastructure in Asia. This process is expensive and time consuming. And what do you think is happening in Asia while she's putting together all of her infrastructure? Well, while she's putting together the needed infrastructure in Asia, her current infrastructure can't handle all the demand. So her customers in Asia and her home base are experiencing slow service and are getting kicked off altogether while they're trying to use her services online. It's not exactly good for business. Now, let's say while she's doing this in Asia, demand also goes up back home. She's in more trouble now because there's no way she's going to be able to get more servers up in time to prevent customer service from going down. Overall, the entire thing is a hot mess. That's where cloud computing can come in to save the day. You see, cloud computing refers to on-demand access to IT services from a third-party supplier through the internet or a WAN. Quick side note, I very quickly want to tell you what a WAN is. So we actually have two things here. There's actually something called a wide area network, a WAN, and a local area network, a LAN. So a local area network is a connection of devices connected together in one physical location, like a house or office. A wide area network, on the other hand, a WAN, is a collection of LANs, a collection of local area networks or other types of networks that could communicate with each other. The largest wide area network, the largest WAN, as you might call it, in the world is the internet. But there are also other smaller examples that can be found, for instance, in a bank. So each bank branch would have a local area network, right? And that makes sense. They have computers that are able to communicate with each other within the branch, right? But these individual local area networks are now able to come together to create a wide area network for the entire bank as a whole. So that way, if you go to any branch of the bank, the information is shared. Now, let's get back to cloud computing. So we've said that cloud computing refers to on-demand access to IT services from a third-party supplier through the internet or a WAN. So instead of procuring and managing their own infrastructure to host applications, companies are essentially renting the infrastructure they need from third-party providers like AWS, which is the largest such provider. Now, why would a company do this? Well, it turns out that there are a bunch of really good reasons. The first of those reasons is to benefit from the massive economies of scale. Remember that AWS is the largest computing service provider. That means they pay wholesale prices for the hardware that companies would have to pay more expensive retail prices for if they chose to go buy the hardware themselves. So this allows AWS to offer lower rates to their customers. Now let's talk about the next reason. Now, to talk about the next benefit, I want you to think back to Chelsea's angry customers and the reason why they were angry. Well, they were angry because Chelsea's self-hosted infrastructure couldn't handle the customer demand. So they would get kicked off of her service or experience slow service. Chelsea didn't expect to have a lot of demand in Asia, so when she did, she rushed to start building infrastructure to handle the demand. But by the time she started this, it was already too late. Her customers were already experiencing performance issues. So to prevent this, she would have essentially needed to be able to prophesy where the demand was going to go up or down. So unless you can see in the future, which if that's the case, please send me the lotto numbers for tomorrow. Otherwise, cloud computing can really help you with this. Which leads us to the next benefit of cloud computing. Instead of having to guess future growth, cloud computing lets your infrastructure quickly grow and shrink based on demand. Now, a perfectly reasonable question to ask is, well, why can't I just build and host infrastructure that is more than I would ever need? Well, then you would have to pay for that, and that could get very expensive very quickly. Beyond that, doing things this way could be a huge waste of money, since demand could fluctuate month to month or even day to day. On some days, your infrastructure wouldn't be utilized all the way, but you would still have to maintain the unutilized infrastructure. Again, this is a huge waste of money, and you're likely trying to make money, not waste it. This is a perfect time to introduce to you two new terms. The first of those terms is capitalized expenditure, or CapEx. CapEx is the expense to attain a fixed asset. Remember that Chelsea chose to buy and host her own infrastructure. This is an example of a capitalized expenditure. On the other hand, we also have operational expenditures. Operational expenditures, or OpEx, are the day-to-day expenses of a business. So this is the stuff after the initial infrastructure has been built, like the cost of maintenance. This understanding of these two terms leads us to the next benefit of cloud computing. And that is that you can move away from capital expenses, so capitalized expenditures, and you can move towards variable expenses or operational expenditures. This means that instead of hosting your own infrastructure on your premises and paying for expensive hardware up front, you can get the same hardware but for a fraction of the cost as you need it and as you use it. Essentially, you're shifting away from an expensive upfront investment to an on-demand, pay-as-you-go model. Now, why would you do this? Well, it saves you the money of paying for infrastructure that you may not even end up utilizing. Instead, you can use that money for other important areas of business like product research or marketing. Talking about saving money, let's talk about our next benefit. As we've said, hosting infrastructure on premises can be expensive. First, you need to make the initial investment to buy the needed hardware, but then you also need a team of engineers to configure every component of the infrastructure. Then you would need to spend money on maintaining the hardware. And all of this isn't even including the utility costs of running a data center on premises. Cloud computing lets you avoid this since you don't have to buy the initial hardware or pay to maintain it. On to the last two benefits, which are related to each other. So let's quickly think back to Chelsea. Remember, it took her months to secure the funding that she needed to build her infrastructure, and then it took her more time for her engineers to configure her newly purchased hardware. It was a time-consuming process. With cloud computing providers specifically like AWS, you can launch and configure new IT services with just a few mouse clicks. So if you needed a new server, that could be done in minutes. If you decided that you no longer need a new server, the server can be shut down in minutes also without wasting any physical hardware. Another closely related benefit is that you can also go global very quickly. So if you needed servers in another region, for instance, let's say you lived in the US, so your initial servers are in the US, but you suddenly have a lot of demand pop up in Asia, like Chelsea did, you're going to also want some data servers over there as quickly as possible, so that way your customers can avoid latency. Well, AWS gives you access to their data servers in regions all around the world. So you can ensure that your customers experience top-notch service no matter where they are. This also has the advantage of disaster recovery because it would let you host multiple copies of your resources in additional regions if you wanted to. So we're all done with benefits now. This would be a great time for you to take a break if you haven't already. Also, please consider subscribing and liking this video. This video and the matching resources take a while to put together, so liking and subscribing would mean a ton to me. Okay, so now let's move on to the next topic. So there are a few terms that you need to know for the exam. You're probably already familiar with the concepts because we've covered them, but we're just going to give you a few words to go along with these concepts, since these words might pop up on the exam and we don't want them to be a stumbling block on the exam. The first of these is agility. This is the idea that a business can experiment with new technologies faster, they can fail faster, and they can ultimately get to market faster without the huge cost of hosting the infrastructure they need on premises. Essentially, AWS is taking on the operational burden of becoming experts in different advanced technologies, and then they're able to present them to their customers as managed offerings. So customers don't have to worry about becoming world-class experts in whatever their service is before they can get going and get their products to market. The next term we have is reliability. So a useful term to know in association with reliability is high availability, or HA. Now this term comes up a lot, so definitely pay attention to it. But HA refers to a system's ability to function even if some components of the infrastructure fail. Next up is scalability. So it's just the company's ability to scale up or down as they need. AWS lets you do this by being able to add or remove infrastructure as you need it. Last but not least, we have elasticity. Now, this is your ability to acquire resources when you need them and release them when you don't. Now, a good question is probably, well, what's the difference between scalability and elasticity? They both sound very similar. Well, elasticity is automatic. So it's the automatic scaling up and or scaling down of resources to meet customer demand, while scalability is merely the ability to add or remove hardware and software resources as you need it. Okay, I hope all that has been helpful. So this marks the end of the first part. At this point, I would suggest downloading a blank version of the guided notes and seeing how much of it you can fill out on your own, and going back in the video to the points where you have a harder time filling in the guided notes. All right, see you in the next part.